The following is a video presentation of a lecture delivered by Dr. Mark Crislip on September 19, 2010 at Portland State University in regards to vaccines and the myths and fallacies surrounding them. This is brought to you by Oregonians for Science and Reason in conjunction with Portland State University. You can visit us at www.o4sr.org.
For polio is the live vaccine. Now, a live vaccine has downsides. The live vaccine is live and occasionally causes polio. But Nigeria was a perfect storm of a lack of general immunity because people weren't using it. HIV, which allowed people to not control the disease. And the impact of HIV in Africa on all sorts of infections is a topic in and of itself. But one of the things that's happened is that because you have an HIV population and you don't have herd immunity, the polio vaccine started multiplying in the community, and now the disease is caused by a vaccine-derived strain. In the last 20 years, it has mutated, and as it's mutated, it's become more virulent, and now it's causing disease in Nigeria. And so now that while wild-type polio is still spreading throughout Nigeria, a significant subset of the disease is also being spread by the polio-derived strain. And that's actually happened before in other places where the vaccine strain has kind of cut loose and spread. And one of those is a whole different sideline. But it looks like the smallpox strain got into the cow population and mutated and is causing cowpox in South America. And then this cowpox is slowly coming north. So maybe if we're lucky, we'll see smallpox again as it jumps from cows into humans. I mean, measles, they think, jumped from cows into humans about 20,000 years ago. It's a disease called rinderpest. And so humans have gotten all these diseases from other animals. HIV probably came from chimpanzees, and our animals have long provided infectious diseases for us over time. But now, anyway, I go off on tangents. Dr. Tangent is my name. But if everybody's vaccinated, that won't happen with polio. But it is now a big problem in Nigeria as a result. Now, to put those 300 cases of vaccine-derived polio in perspective in the world, last year there were 10 billion doses. 10 testing years, they gave 2 billion kids 10 billion doses of an oral vaccine. And during that time, 33,000 kids had wild polio. Which is a lot of kids to get paralyzed from polio. And 3.5 million cases of polio, they estimate, were prevented by the oral vaccine. So this is one of these fine points that never would have happened if the clerics had decided that polio was responsible for sterility and HIV in their population. Now, nobody here thinks that the polio virus is going to cause you to be sterile and have HIV. We have other problems. And we're going to sort of, the big three I'm going to touch on now is mercury and autism, which has been a big thing for years, the MMR and autism, the too many too soon, which is a common refrain of the anti-vaccine people, and then toxins in the vaccine. And as I've said many times before, 5 out of 4 Americans don't understand. So those are big three. I write these things, and as I go, I add things, and I'll bother to go back and change. I actually spell check this talk, which I very rarely do in my talks. It has to give it to an audience who's I can't. Most of the time, we talk to people who are dozing in the audience, residents of Good Sam, so I don't have to worry about the spelling. Now, autism, I'm not an autism expert, I'm an infectious disease specialist. So all I can say is that autism has been increasing as a diagnosis in the United States. Most likely and primarily due to a combination of expanded diagnostic criteria and increased awareness of the disease. And that people are, when you become aware of the disease and you start making the diagnosis based on not looser criteria, but recognizing that it's a spectrum, people can have minor manifestations of diseases and still have the disease, that more people are being diagnosed with autism. And that's very true of a lot of infections, like, my favorite is toxic shock syndrome. Classic toxic shock syndrome is a whole bunch of characteristics. Every once in a while you see a patient who sort of has it but doesn't meet all the criteria, but they actually have that disease. They just didn't have the full-blown manifestations of toxic shock. And that happens with a lot of illnesses that you see. Now, do vaccines cause autism? No. But here's the thing, is that autism usually starts to manifest around the time the kids are getting their maximum vaccines. So there's an association here. And always remember that association is not causation. But you have to be very sympathetic to a parent whose kid gets a bunch of vaccines, and then around that time, they start to manifest autism. And it's hard to say, no, it wasn't. I mean, 25 years ago, you'd say, well, I don't know. I mean, they're getting all these vaccines, we're starting to see autism. Is there cause and effect? The answer's answered now, but at one time, it was a legitimate question to ask because, you know, what's happening to these poor kids? And random awful things happen all the time to people. My whole career is based on people getting awful diseases for no damn good reason and ended up trying to die in the ICU. And why do I have my illness infection? Well, I don't know, you're sick. Do the best I can. You usually don't know the reason. There are 25,000 heart attacks in the United States every week. Now it's September. We're giving out lots of flu vaccine to everybody we can give it to. While you're giving out the flu vaccine, a lot of people are going to have heart attacks. If you get a vaccine and you have a heart attack in 24 hours, you're going to blame the vaccine. So you have to look to see if the rates of these diseases go above what you would expect in the baseline. The 300 severe allergic reactions, 300 people have an anaphylactic shock. They try and die of allergies every week in the United States. So you have a whole bunch of kids getting Gardasil to prevent HPV. And during this time, some of them, just by statistical chance, are also going to have an anaphylactic reaction. Did the anaphylactic reaction come from the vaccine? Well, if you had the vaccine the day you had the anaphylactic reaction, you personally are going to blame the vaccine. But you're going to have to look at the overall populations to see, are those rates higher in the people getting the vaccine compared to people who don't get the vaccine? And that kind of information is very difficult to tease out in populations. And because random crap happens all the time to people for no damn good reason, and human beings like to find patterns in random crap. And that's why you can look at the clouds and see a bunny rabbit or Abraham Lincoln. There ain't no bunny rabbit in the clouds. It's just clouds. We see patterns that don't exist. So there are a lot of issues with the vaccines, you know, and whether or not they cause these diseases. And I very well know, and there's a lot of, those of you who listen to the Skeptic Guides to the Universe, last week's podcast had a real nice discussion on human psychology. And basically, one good story is worth more than every study I'm going to talk about. And I recognize that. And I have to talk that with my patients who think that they have a process where I know they almost certainly do not. And it's hard to argue the data against a personal story of someone who has suffered from some process. And these are difficult things to deal with when you're one-on-one with patients in the hospital. But the motto, of course, of every skeptic is the plural of anecdote is anecdotes, not data. The plural of data is datum? Data?
Data. Singular.
Data.
What's the plural of dirt? See, I lost the Scrabble game over this, and I'm still bitter. I still insist to my wife that the plural of dirt is dirts. Yes, dirts.
Yeah.
Plural.
Yeah, you're finding dirt.
Sorry? Anyway. Mercury in the vaccine. We'll start with mercury. So, mercury is a neurotoxin, and there's no doubt about that. That's what caused the Mad Hatter to be mad. The Hatters in the old times would use mercury to cure their hats, and they all went crazy. So Mad Hatter had reason to be crazy. But that's elemental mercury. Now my brother and I, we used to break open the mercury thermometers and play around with that stuff, and we were wild. Never did me any harm. I don't know. But when you read the stuff on the interwebs about mercury, you got to ask the question, what mercury are they talking about? Like chlorine gas killed thousands in World War I. Sodium chloride is pretty harmless unless someone hits you on the head with a Morton salt bottle. I mean, salt is not a hard chlorine under those circumstances is not harmful. So when people talk about the toxicity of mercury, mercury is a neurotoxin. The stuff that I played with out of the thermometer when I was a kid, probably not so much the stuff in the vaccine, because the stuff in the vaccine is thimerosal. It was used until recently as a preservative in vaccines. It was removed from most of the vaccines except for multi-dose influenza, I think some tetanus in about 2000. Put in perspective, how much mercury is in a 6-ounce chunk of tuna? I found that if you eat 6 ounces of tuna, you get almost 9,000 micrograms of methyl mercury, inorganic mercury. Whereas a maximum dose that a kid could have been exposed to when the mercury was at its most in the vaccine was 187 micrograms. So, you have far more mercury. Now, kids are small. Kids have developing brains. They're different than adults chowing down on the chicken of the sea. You have to remember that they didn't get that much mercury in the vaccines. And it was ethyl mercury. And ethyl mercury is not the same as methyl mercury, which is not the same as the stuff my brother and I used to play with in the backyard when my parents were around. We're learning all sorts of stuff like that. So that's the chemical compound of thimerosal. It is not mercury. I mean, there's mercury in it, and there's sulfur in Lasix for anybody here on Lasix. And if you were to chow down on a gram of sulfur, you would not have a good time for it. So there hasn't been. So what's the data? There's now about a dozen studies out there that have looked and tried to tease out whether or not mercury is the primary cause of autism. And you can get the full 9 yards for that at Science-Based Medicine, where I go together one of the ones. The most compelling data, I think, is autism rates since they took mercury out of the vaccine. And even though they've taken mercury out of all the vaccine and no one's getting any more mercury in the vaccine, autism rates continue to climb. So you'd think that if it was due to the mercury in the vaccines, then if you took it all out, the kids would stop getting autism, and it just hasn't happened. I think of all the studies out there, that's the most compelling epidemiologic data to show that vaccines don't cause autism. And there are multiple other ones, but I found that one to be the most compelling of the group. And there have, as I said, been at least 10 other epidemiological studies since the last decade that have looked very hard because, unlike no one in medicine wants to hurt people. We want to make them better. Look for a relationship between thimerosal and autism, and they haven't been able to find a good relationship. So I think that this has pretty much been a non-starter, and that I think the data, as best you can determine, is pretty clear that thimerosal is safe. Thimerosal does not cause, is not associated with autism, and mercury is a non-starter as a cause of autism in kids. Now, adjuvants, they do now currently aluminum is the adjuvant that's being used to make some vaccines work better, and that's the current toxin that they're pointing at that causes autism. Now we have to repeat those studies looking at aluminum. There are no studies that I've found in reviewing this topic to look at aluminum and autism. But again, the amount of aluminum is very tiny and is probably unlikely to cause autism. The problem with this currently, though, is that if you think your child has autism due to mercury, you can go get your hair tested for mercury levels. You can go get your urine tested for mercury levels. There are a bunch of labs out there that do non-standard testing for Lyme, for all these other diseases, and then they give people therapy to bind the mercury to try and reverse the autism. And the big one they use is chelation therapy, where they inject the kid with intravenous stuff to bind up the mercury. It also binds up the calcium, and it's killed a couple of autistic children who've gotten chelation therapy for disease that is not due to this etiology, and they've gotten this and died. So this is not without its downsides when people think that mercury is a cause of autism. And all of you probably are aware of the Do No Harm website, where you can find all the different side effects from these different interventions. How about the MMR and autism? Well, in 1998, Dr. Andrew Wakefield published a pretty unimpressive study, if you actually go read it, about kids with autism and whether or not they had colitis, inflammation of the colon, and whether or not they had measles from the vaccine causing colitis and autism. And he had 12 children who had autism, and he did extensive evaluations. All these kids got colonoscopies. Anybody heard of colonoscopy yet? Ain't fun, is it? I wouldn't want to do it to kids. He did it to the kids without getting proper, what's the word, authority from the